Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of The Future is Socialist. I'm your host, Emberly McCullough, and we've got some wonderful things to talk about today and some up to date issues. So, we're going to start with ignore my vacuum cleaner back there. Today, we're going to start with Barack Obama and the cunning of American exceptionalism. This article was written March 14th by Ahmed Dia Dardir. Barack Obama's new memoir, A Promised Land, came out as the world was looking at the U.S. with anticipation and mistrust. It was published as the world awaited the results of the U.S. presidential elections between the clownish Donald Trump and the visibly incompetent Joseph Biden. The book trumpets the American model as the promised land against the failures of the American system that appeared most clearly in the last 4 years. A corrupt, populist, and maniacal leader at the top of U.S. executive power, the colossal failure of the U.S. medical system to respond to the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, even after Obama's much celebrated expansion of the healthcare system through the Affordable Care Act, and the general deterioration and defunding of the already rudimentary public service sector in the country. The book coincidentally came out shortly before the failures of the American system played out in the circus of January 6th, when demonstrators clothed in outlandish costumes and carrying a mesh of medieval, Confederate, white supremacist, and Nazi symbols stormed Capitol Hill to block the ratification of the presidential elections, forcing the world to look at America not as a model, but as a spectacle of failures, a farce. The book's readers are thus likely to experience dissonance. On the one side, we have the realities, shortcomings, failures, and injustices that characterize the American system and model, and on the other side, the diametrically opposite promised America Obama paints. This dissonance is native to the text of A Promised Land, wherein Obama contradicts his propaganda for the American model with a constant, though generally moderate and shallow, criticism of the American system that did not allow him to implement the change he putatively espoused. Obama resolves this general dissonance through the false dichotomy between the reality of America and American ideals, America that was promised, or the American dream. This falsification does more than evade criticism. It further mobilizes criticisms of this reality as themselves part of the American ideal and steps towards the deferred realization of the American promise. American history, according to Obama, becomes the stage for a fundamental contest between two opposing visions of what America is and what it should be. Whatever this is and what it should be are, yes, two opposing visions. There are many visions for what America should be. There are many visions of what America could be, not just two visions of what Mr. Obama thinks there might be. Because we not only have Republicans and Democrats, we also have people like me. We have socialists, we have communists, we have libertarians, we have conservatives that aren't Republican. We have Nazis, white supremacists. There are many opposing views in this country of what we should be. But the one that I advocate is for socialism, because socialism gives you dignity. Basically, it's just giving people dignity. And I don't understand why so many people have such a problem with that. This contest, which has defined the American experience, according to Obama, is embedded in founding documents that could simultaneously proclaim all men equal and yet count a slave as a 3/5 a man. It finds expression in our earliest court opinions, as when the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court bluntly explains to Native Americans that their tribe's right to convey property aren't enforceable, since the court of the conqueror has no capacity to recognize the just claims of the conquered. Obama then moves from acknowledging and arguably belittling the injustices ingrained within the American system and somehow endowing those injustices with a duality that redeems the American system and erases the plight of the victims of its injustices at the very moment of its acknowledgement. Sorry, someone was calling me. Um, It's a contest that's been fought on the fields of Gettysburg and Appomattox, i.e., the American Civil War, mythologized as a war to end slavery, but also in the halls of Congress, on a bridge in Selma, i.e., the Civil Rights Movement, across the vineyards of California, and down the streets of New York, a contest fought by soldiers, but more often by union organizers, suffragists, Pullman boarders, student leaders, waves of immigrants, and LGBTQ activists armed with nothing more than picket signs, pamphlets, or a pair of marching shoes. The trajectory of these movements, however, tells a different story. The American system imposed a ceiling on the successes of these movements, as is the case of the systemic and individual anti-Blackness, especially but not exclusively by a prison system that disproportionately targets Black populations and a police force that assaults Black people with impunity. The American system further mobilized the little successes of these movements to promote further injustice, the election of the first Black president as an alibi for anti-Blackness, the repealing of don't ask, don't tell policy under Obama, thus allowing gays and lesbians to openly serve in the near genocidal wars of the American empire, and market the U.S. military and its conquests as progressive and gay-friendly. The mismatch between the American system and any ideals of justice or radical inclusion is irreconcilable. In a settler colonial context and under the realities of American capitalism and systemic racism, any inclusion is always at the expense of someone else, and any change is mobilized to foreclose change. The change to foreclose change. In the course of the attempts to posit American ideals as contrary to American reality, Obama asked, do we care to match the reality of America to its ideals? Obama's presidency, however, even according to his memoir, was marked by a commitment to the reality of America, even at the expense of these supposed ideals, including the ones that were part of his electoral campaign. Throughout his apologia, Obama's repeated and constant failures to implement change, his compromises, his reneging on electoral promises and reform slogans are themselves marketed as a new kind of politics that eschews the political bickering and partisan food fights that have characterized the Washington scene for the sake of harmonious bipartisanship. In other words, the change Obama enthusiastically sought to introduce is a change that strengthens the forces of the status quo. Haven't we had enough of the status quo in this country? Haven't we had enough yet, America? Come on, Americans. We need to have a better system. We need to have a better system for everybody. Capitalism, with everything that it purportedly does, and yes, capitalism has helped lift some people out of poverty, but it's actually made most people, the vast majority of people, worse, more poor, worse off, with diminishing returns, lost jobs, stolen wages, lost lives. Look at Appalachia. Look at all the small towns around this country who had factories, and they're now gone. Rural America has been decimated by capitalism. Capitalism is the problem. Socialism is the fix. Obama's commitment to resist change was clear from day one of his presidency when he appointed administrators that represented the establishment and the status quo. Hillary Clinton, Robert Gates, Joseph Biden, and the list goes on. This commitment to the status quo, coded as unity and bipartisanship, extended to Obama's relationship with Congress. Even when both chambers were controlled by a Democratic majority during the first midterm of his presidency. Excuse me. This was most evidently the case in his administration's dealing with the healthcare portfolio that led to the issuing of the Affordable Care Act, commonly referred to as Obamacare. The promise to establish a universal healthcare system was one of the prominent items in Obama's electoral campaign, and the main reason that I voted for him, not once, but twice. Obamacare is not good enough. We need universal healthcare. Universal. Everybody. Whereas the drive to establish such a system would have necessitated the collision with the forces of the status quo, not only the Republican Party and right-leaning members of the Democratic Party, Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema, and their ilk, or Democratic members of the Congress who answer to right-leaning constituencies, but also the insurance companies and the entire medical industrial complex. This is a battle Obama could have very likely won, and without even resorting to the arsenal of Trump-esque executive backdoor legal and paralegal practices at the hands of a president, which might have indeed undermined Obama's reelectability. An aggressive public relations campaign on behalf of universal healthcare was likely to garner the support of large sectors of the mainstream media, could have won over large sectors of the American public who desperately need affordable medical services, and may have, in fact, countered the bias many Americans hold against all forms of governmental intervention. At worst, such a campaign could have pressured some of the harsh opponents and critics of universal healthcare into silence. Triumph, to be clear, was not guaranteed, but this was a battle where confrontation was more than likely to prove fruitful. Instead, Obama resorted to preemptive defeat. Instead of confrontation, Obama made sure to present to Congress a watered-down version of the healthcare bill, whereas Obama's plan was already based on the Mitt Romney plan implemented in Massachusetts. Obama made sure that the final version of the bill preemptively appeased its critics and detractors. Divisive, in other words, real changes like the public option or the attempt to curtail the power insurance companies hold effectively over the life and death of the residents and citizens of the U.S., were completely shunned. Obama only disingenuously engaged the public relations front with timid defenses that failed to offer a clear refutation to outrageous fabrications by the bill's detractors, including the conservative claim that the bill introduced death panels that would determine who gets health care and who is denied life support, which was total bullshit, ginned up by the Republican Party. Obama lacked the critical courage to point out that under the American regime of undeterred market capitalism, insurance companies already perform this function. Obama's failure to shape public opinion on this matter, nay, his shunning of any real attempts to engage in a struggle to shape or transform public opinion, is inseparable from his dedication to the American system as it stands. Winning over impoverished Americans, many of them right-leaning white working class members, to support the plan to provide them with the health care they desperately needed would have required challenging one of the most profoundly ingrained mythologies of America, that wealth and welfare are exclusively the product of hard work, that those who worked hard have made it, and that those who lack the means for basic welfare simply need to work harder or else it is their fault. In short, a public opinion campaign on behalf of universal healthcare would have necessarily challenged the American dream. Wealth and welfare are exclusively the product of hard work. This is absolutely false. False, false, false. I'll tell you why. I'll give you a little anecdote. I'll tell you about me. Okay? I came from a family with parents who like to drink a lot and do drugs. Therefore, myself, my brother, my sister, not only did we have to share 5 people in a 2-bedroom house, we also barely had any food to eat. There are studies that show that children growing up without enough food to eat means that their brains don't develop like other children who have balanced diets, regular balanced food. Okay? This is a well-known fundamental fact that people need to understand. The fact that we have children starving in this fucking country right now as I speak is infuriating. It absolutely infuriates me. It makes me so angry I can barely see. Every day when I walk out of my house and I drive down the street to go to the store, I see homeless people, houseless people. I see children living in cars. In the state of California. Are you kidding me? With the natural resources that are available here, with the amount of housing that's available here, with the amount of food that goes through the grocery stores here, the fact that we have people who can't afford to eat is wrong on every level. It's a fundamental problem that needs to be fixed because every person has dignity and deserves dignity. Every person deserves to eat well. Every person deserves to have a roof over their head. Shelter. One of the basic laws of survival is shelter, food, and clothing. Shelter, food, and clothing. This is the basic survival mode. Don't get me started on Obamacare. Don't even get me because it makes me so freaking angry. A promised land is a lengthy apologia for the American system, a tedious apology for Obama's failures to implement change. It presents his renewed dedication to the American model, the American system, the American dream, and American exceptionalism. The irony, however, is that the apology Obama presents for his failures is that the American system would not have allowed such changes as the ones he promised and allegedly sought to implement. The same American system to which he renews his dedication and allegiance on almost every page of the book. Perhaps there will always remain those who look up to the American model and are easily duped by American propaganda, the American media, and the glossy memoirs of hypocritical politicians. There will also always be those of us who are vigilant observers who refuse to deny or belittle the histories and present of racism, discrimination, genocide, and exploitation that propagandists try to sweep under the carpet of the American dream. Those of us who identify Trump's presidency as not an exception, but as an emblem of the American polity, and those who see when they look at Washington not the ambiguous promises of Obama and company, but the Congress and White House that sanction the violence of empire and the January 6th circus. Ahmed Dardir holds a PhD in Middle Eastern Studies from Columbia University. His forthcoming book is called Licentious Topographies, Global Counter-Revolution and Bad Subjectivity in Modern Egypt. His personal blog can be found at textualtrimmings.blogspot.com. Okay, maybe we should talk about universal health care for a moment. This is another personal anecdote. I hope you don't take offense, but I moved to Georgia, the state of Georgia, to be with my sister when the first year of my cancer journey. I couldn't get help in the state of Georgia. I couldn't get health care. I have cancer and I couldn't get health care in Georgia. I almost killed myself because of that. I attempted suicide. I did. I have a lot to live for, and I attempted suicide because I thought that would be better than slowly, tortuously dying from cancer. Okay? Yeah. And if I did it, think about how many other people attempt to kill themselves or do kill themselves every year because they can't get access to healthcare. Just think about that for a minute. Let it sink in. Let it sink in that people kill themselves because they can't get access to healthcare or they attempt suicide. Just let that sink in for a minute. Okay. Let's move on. Here is a pretty cool story from Common Dreams that was published today. 50 House Democrats demand Biden slash Pentagon budget to invest in public health, common good. The U.S. budget priorities are dangerously out of whack, said Win Without War. It's time to put them back in order. By Brett Wilkins, staff writer. A broad range of progressive groups on Tuesday echoed 50 Democratic U.S. lawmakers who urged President Joe Biden to redirect government spending from wars and militarism to programs of social and ecological uplift by seeking to reduce the $740 billion Pentagon budget. Let me read that to you again. $740 billion Pentagon budget. In a letter led by Reps Barbara Lee, Mark Pocan, and Jake, and I apologize if I say this wrong, Auchincloss, and signed by 47 congressional Democrats, the lawmakers assert that part of undoing the damage of the last 4 years is reevaluating our spending priorities as a nation. That reevaluation should begin with the Department of Defense, the letter states. Hundreds of billions of dollars now directed in the military would have greater return if invested in diplomacy, humanitarian aid, global public health, sustainability initiatives, and basic research. Now is the time to reverse course on the too much is never enough approach to Pentagon spending and start redirecting some of that money into priority domestic and human needs. Robert Weissman, Public Citizen. noting that the U.S. could cut the Pentagon budget by more than 10% and still spend more than the next 10 largest militaries combined. The letter urges Biden, whose fiscal year 2022 budget will reportedly request the same level of military spending as during former President Donald Trump's final year in office, to seek a significantly reduced Pentagon top line. Today, I joined my Defense Spending Reduction Caucus co-chair at Rep. Mark Pocan and Rep. Auchincloss in calling on the Biden admin to cut our defense budget in order to meet the scale of this crisis. We must rebalance our priorities to build a safer and more prosperous world. Rep. Barbara Lee on Twitter. The United States war on terror has lasted 2 decades, all of my son's life, and cost the U.S. approximately $6.4 trillion, the lawmakers write. Our men and women in uniform have served bravely and honorably, yet the premise of a military-centric foreign policy is a failure. We must end the forever wars, heal our veterans, and reorient towards a holistic conception of national security that centers public health, climate change, and human rights. You have spoken frequently about the need to not only reject the destruction of Trumpism, but to build things back better, the letter notes. A broad cross-section of voters and organizations, including conservative, faith-based, and progressive groups, support responsible spending reductions at the Pentagon. The same voters who sent you to the White House on this promise sent us to Congress expecting us to make this vision a reality and to chart a new course. Therefore, we strongly urge you to request a reduced Pentagon budget when you send your fiscal year 2022 budget to Congress, the lawmakers conclude. We have a duty to invest in the American people more than we invest in defense contractor profits and Pentagon slush funds, Rep. Mark Pocan. In a statement promoting the letter, Lee, the only member of Congress at the time who opposed the 2001 U.S.-led invasion of Afghanistan, said that as we face a global and she's a hero for that, as we face a global pandemic and unprecedented economic crisis, the needs of American families far outweigh the need to continue feeding our bloated military defense budget. Pocan said that the coronavirus pandemic has proven that American national security should not be defined by the number of nuclear weapons collecting dust in storage, but by healthcare security, job security, housing security, the security of working families surviving with a roof over their heads, food on the table, and money in the bank. We have a duty to invest in the American people more than we invest in defense contractors, profits, and Pentagon slush funds, he insisted. We can't build back better if the Pentagon's budget is just as big as it was under Donald Trump. At Rep. Barbara Lee, at Rep. Auchincloss, and I led 50 of our colleagues urging at POTUS to cut this year's defense budget. Let's prioritize the American people over defense contractor profits. Rep. Mark Pocan. Auchincloss, a former Marine, added that you don't have to be a veteran to know that the defense budget is out of control when you have $1 trillion fighter jet that can't dogfight, a reference to the F-35, each of which costs well over $100 million. Arguing that the 50 House lawmakers are right, the Advocacy Coalition... Hello, I'm sorry. The Veterans Administration is calling me. Hello, this is Emberly. Okay, just I'll be out in a few minutes. Hey, sorry about that. I apparently have a visitor here. So I'm going to finish this article and then we're going to close up for the day because I apparently have somebody who needs to talk to me. A reference to the F-35, each of which costs well over $100 million. $100 million. Arguing that the 50 House lawmakers are right, the Advocacy Coalition, Win Without War, released a statement asserting that against the backdrop of a devastating pandemic, global economic crisis, and looming climate catastrophe, it is more critical than ever that we end the failed mindset that has led us to funnel near limitless funds into war making while ignoring the true threats to our security. The U.S. budget priorities are dangerously out of whack, the group added. It's time to put them back in order. Robert Weissman, president of the consumer advocacy group Public Citizen, said in a statement that the coronavirus pandemic has underscored how grotesquely bloated is our Pentagon budget and how spending on weapons does nothing to address many of the greatest national security risks. Now is the time to reverse course on the too much is never enough approach to Pentagon spending and start redirecting some of that money into priority domestic and human needs, said Weissman. Carly Town, a co-director of the women-led peace group Code Pink and coordinator of the Defund the Pentagon campaign, said in a statement that cutting the Pentagon budget and reinvesting in the needs of our communities is not only morally necessary, it's also urgent if we're going to address the biggest threat that faces our planet, climate change. The Pentagon is the world's single largest consumer of oil and one of the world's top greenhouse gas emitters. If we're going to take the future of our planet seriously, Stresstown, we need to cut the Pentagon budget now. Let's just be realistic. The Pentagon budget is massively bloated. Massively bloated. We don't need to spend this much money, especially since we're not spending that money on actually paying our soldiers and our troops and helping our veterans better. No, that's not a part of it. It's buying crappy airplanes that don't work. All right. Well, that's the end for today. I'm so sorry that we had that mishap earlier today. I really apologize. I need to set up a go live checklist. I will get more professional, guys. I'm so super sorry. Thank you for watching today. I'll be live again tomorrow at 4:00. So 4 p.m. Monday through Friday. I'm thinking about the weekends too, but I'll let you know. So Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. I'll be live streaming every day. Okay. Thanks, guys. That's the end of the Future is Socialist podcast number 4 with your host, Emberly McCullough. Peace and love.